All right, so now we're going to see how the Europeans chose to rule their conquered territories and the effects of European rule. And basically, you had two different ways you could run your colonies. One is indirect rule. That's when you leave the local leadership in place and you control your new colony through them. If you can convince the locals to get on board, it could be very effective because the local leadership obviously already know the language and the culture and the ins and outs and who matters and who doesn't matter. And so you would often try to rule through them. Britain did this very effectively in different parts of Africa, parts of Southeast Asia, but sometimes the local leadership would not cooperate and would refuse to work with their new European overlords. So when that happened, you would of course have to remove the local leadership and then send people from your country to the colony to rule it directly. So direct rules when you remove the local leadership and you control it directly with people sent from your country. Britain's going to have to eventually do this in Burma, for instance. The King of Burma will refuse to cooperate, so you have to remove them and send people. Britain's going to end up doing this in in India as well. They're going to have to rule India directly. They're going to have to control it directly. France often preferred direct rule, using their people to directly control. Then you look at the effect oftentimes colonial rule had on these colonies. It was a mix of positive and negative. In many of the colonies in Southeast Asia and Africa, you develop plantation economies because if you're Europe, you've conquered these areas just because you want to exploit their natural resources. So you create these huge farms, right? And so the entire economy becomes based on these plantations, which is great if you are a plantation owner. But with a plantation economy, oftentimes what happens is there's a handful of very rich people, and the majority of the people remain in poverty because they are paid very low wages. At the same time, their taxes are very high because Europeans, they just want to exploit their colonies. I mean, they say they're there to spread civilization, but that's just really a lie. They want to exploit it for economic gain. And then you turn the colonies into export market. They're always sending out their raw goods, and they're not keeping the raw goods from themselves and turning it into finished products because you want to sell your finished products to them. Now, a benefit is Europeans do invest in infrastructure, things like roads and bridges in their colonies, but that's only to help make trade easier. Right? They do introduce and integrate a modern economic system into their colonies, but once again, that's only to make trade easier. And they do begin to educate the upper class of the people that they conquered, but that's only to use them to help them run their colonies. And this is also a danger because it introduces Western ideas like democracy to these colonies. Eventually, these colonies are going to want that. So what you see in these colonies, there's a pattern of resistance that develops. And these colonies that are conquered, slowly there's the rise of a Western educated middle class in these colonies in Southeast Asia. You'll see the same thing in Africa as well. And this Western educated middle class are introduced to those Western ideas like natural rights, for instance, social contract, democracy. And so this Western educated middle class in these colonies begin to struggle for economic and political rights. They usually don't demand independence right away, just better treatment, more authority and power over their own people. And when that is denied, then they begin to demand complete independence because they have been influenced by those Western ideas like a social contract, and they begin to argue that by being conquered and controlled by the Europeans and exploited unfairly, that their natural rights are being taken advantage of, therefore they have the right to rebel and demand independence.